So today I'm going to do a different kind of Dharma talk. I might go on a little longer. I'm going to quote from other people more than my own words. And it's a topic on politics, which we don't often speak of. And I'm really going to speak about the horrors of what's going on now in Gaza and Israel. Or perhaps there's a bit of a ceasefire. I'm not sure if that's started yet. So though we often don't speak about politics, we do often speak about dukkha. And one of the translations that we've used for it is anguish. I think that's the right word for what's going on in Gaza and Israel now. And as a Jew, I feel this on a deep cellular level. I feel this moral crisis and all the horrors, and really have a deep fear of how this is and how this will unwind. But Ezra Klein is doing a really, I feel like, excellent coverage on his podcast at the New York Times. And it's really helping me to understand views both from the Palestinian side and the Israeli side, and to really more fully understand the history that's led to this. There's so many conditions and so much history. And the situation is so complex. Now, that's something we often speak about in reflective meditation: complexity and conditionality. So although Ezra Klein has had several podcasts on the topic, again, from the Palestinian side, the Israeli side, I'm going to quote from his interview with Rabbi Sharon Brous, who's a rabbi in the LA area who's dedicated her life and her work to fighting injustice. And again, I'm going to use other people's words a lot, so I'm going to start with Ezra's words. He says, "Everything I'm going to talk about is hard to talk about. It's hard to talk about because it's personal to me. It's hard to talk about because it's happening in the midst of an active, hellacious war. And it's hard to talk about because even when there is not war, this is just hard to talk about." I agree with that completely. That is my experience. This is really hard for me to talk about, and yet I sort of can't not talk about it at this point, because it's sort of staring us in the face, and it's really tearing at my heart, probably many of your hearts. So this is an hour-long interview. Rabbi Sharon Brous covers a lot of ground, but if I was to have to call it a theme, I would say she speaks about what's demanded of us in a time of moral crisis. And of course, in Buddhism and reflective meditation, we often speak about ethics and morality. And indeed, there is a moral crisis going on. Also, though, I'm choosing to speak about this because we're speaking about the Brahma Viharas this week. And I think that her interview fits very nicely in with the Brahma Vihara of compassion. Because really what she's saying throughout the interview is what is demanded of us is to look at the anguish. That's what we say about dukkha. And we also say that understand the Buddhist teaching of compassion arises by facing dukkha, by knowing dukkha. So Rabbi Sharon speaks about an ancient ritual at the Temple Mount in Israel, which is a high holy place for both Muslims and Jews. And again, the teaching she gives, an ancient teaching, parallels knowing dukkha, and she calls it the spiritual requirement to develop compassion in the face of dukkha. She says, a Mishnah, an ancient rabbinic text in the code of law that was codified 2,000 years ago, tells us the story of what would happen when people used to go up to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And imagine Mecca, like hundreds of thousands of people coming at once on a kind of sacred pilgrimage to Jerusalem. They would ascend the steps of the Temple Mount, and then they would go through this arched entryway, and they would turn to the right, and they would circle around the perimeter of this courtyard. I don't know. I just have to pause here. I've been to the Temple Mount. So reading this actually has some, and I know many of you or some of you have been there. It's quite an amazing place, inhabited, not inhabited, but high holy place for Muslims, and Jews get to visit. So back to her writing. And then they would exit essentially right where they came in, except the Mishnah says, for someone who's brokenhearted, that person would ascend the steps and walk through the arched entryway, but they would turn to the left. And every single person who would pass them coming from the right would have to stop and ask this simple question: what happened to you? And then the person would say, I'm brokenhearted. My loved one just died. I'm worried sick about my kid. I found a lump. And the people walking from right to left would have to stop and offer a blessing before they could continue on their pilgrimage. And I just think about how profound the insight is in this ancient ritual, because if you spend your whole life dreaming of going up to this on this sacred pilgrimage to the holiest site, the holiest place on the holiest days, and doing your circle around the courtyard, the last thing in the world you want to do is stop and ask the poor guy who's coming towards you, are you okay? What's your story? What's going on with you? And yet, central to your religious obligation, in fact, the only religious obligation you have on that day, is precisely to see this other person in their suffering, to ask them what their story is, and then to give them a blessing. And if you're broken, shattered, the last thing you want to do is show up in the space with all these people and go against the current in a public and visible way. And yet you're obligated to do this. And so I think the rabbis kind of captured this very sacred and profound psychological and spiritual tool for us, which is to say that when we're suffering and when we're hurting, we need to be seen by other people. We need somebody to say, tell me about your pain. Help me understand what's going on for you. And we need to be blessed. And when we're walking from right to left, because we're okay that day, not to turn our eyes away and our heart away from the poor person who's walking towards us, who's broken that day. Otherwise, our humanity is lost to us. And it doesn't only hurt the person who's broken, it hurts the whole society. In fact, hurts our democracy. It endangers our democracy when we're unable to actually engage one another's pain because we're feeling that our cause is so righteous. Our work is so holy, so important that we're going to keep circling to the right, even though there are these people who are quietly walking in the other direction saying, please, please see me. I'm hurting right now. And I need you to help me in this moment of my pain. I need you to help me by bearing sacred witness to my heartache in this very moment. Wow, so that's the end of her writing. And as I was reading it, I realized, I guess I am in a way using you all to bear sacred witness to my heartache about what's going on in Israel and Gaza and what that's like to be a Jew in this moment in history. But I know I'm not the only person here who's in pain about this crisis in the Middle East. Each of you from your own perspective, each of you based on your experiences. And so just like Ezra Klein spoke about how hard it is to talk about going on, it actually was hard to give this Dharma talk, and yet I had to. In teaching reflective meditation, back to that, we teach about knowing dukkha when it's there, bearing witness to one another's dukkha, but also knowing when it's honestly too much to bear, because we have that choice. We can skip reading the news for a while. We have that choice because we're not in the middle of a war, so we can sort of look at dukkha as we're able. And the same, of course, in our meditation. You have permission to do the meditation as you do, and to face dukkha when it's there, and turn away when it's simply more than you can bear. So let's sit with whatever is going on for us in our usual way. I'll